So today we're going to start doing some embellishment of this bag. In fact, I'm planning to do all of my embellishment. And so what I have planned is to first stitch in the ditch, or I actually like to stitch near the ditch, to sort of hold it down, because it is possible, even with spray basting, as you start densely quilting areas, it's possible for the nearby areas to start to come unhooked and sort of pucker off the layers, and I don't like to let that happen very much. And so I'm going to do that first, and then I'm going to probably do some kind of swirly quilting on the face of my color wash. Then I'll want to couch some fibers around the edges, and then do some of this thread sketching around the outside of the color wash. I like to blur the lines between the piecing and the border, and probably finish up with some buttons and anything else that comes up and seems right as I go along. And so that's what I have planned. So I don't like to stitch in the ditch, because if it wanders from one side to the other, I dislike that look. So I like to pick a side, and because I'm going all the way along my sashing, I'm going to pick that side. So I've gone one needle position right of my foot. I'm going to ride my foot along the seam, and I'm going to sew one position over. I'd be lying if I said that I could remember the exact order that I quilted the different parts of this purse top. So I'm just going to make a plan and go for it, and we'll both learn whether or not I've chosen a good way. I like variegated thread for these kinds of jobs, and these are a little bit thicker than a regular sewing thread. This is a 30. I actually think in this situation it's sort of 6 of one, half a dozen of another. So I'm just going to pick one. I'm going to use this rust thread in my bobbin. This is a good time to pull your tail up the way that you should when you want your quilting to look nice. And of course you start with tiny stitches, and please stitch something over this pieced watercolor quilting that you're used to stitching, because these areas are thick enough that it's going to be a little bit harder than you're used to if you're doing a smooth surface a lot, or regular piecing with just the thickness of the fabric and no fusible in there. So this first time, please start with a pattern that is very easy for you. I put a vote card, polling card on one of my last videos so that people could weigh in whether they wanted me to work on the embellishment for this video or move on to start the stencil. And I did get more votes for this, and so that's why I'm doing this. And I didn't realize I could do that until after I'd posted the video. But in the future, if there is a poll for what we're going to do next, I'll try to make sure and mention it during the video so that you know it's there. So here's what mine looks like on one side, and the other side. It's starting to become a little misshapen. It's a little baggy here, but once we do our stuff here, it's going to start to pull that into, and everything will end up nice and flat. So I started experimenting with different kinds of fuzzy, pretty yarn, and there's a little bit more work with some of these furry ones, because you almost have to pick or comb out the fibers to get this hairy stuff. But I really rather liked the way that looked, and I've used this white a lot. I do tend to like the way that white looks. Couching uses a specialty foot. This foot has a hole right here to feed your thread through, and then it has a groove on the bottom so that your thread can feed underneath there. But what I'm going to do is try it with my regular foot and see what kind of results I can get. So I'm just going to start on the edge. And I'm going to start with a really tiny zigzag and just try to get this anchored down. Alright, and then I'm going to make my stitch more like one or two, and let's see if this is at all satisfying. Okay, I need a bigger stitch. So what I can already see is that with my stitch at a 1, I'm on and then I'm off and then I'm on and then I'm off, and so I'm going to go ahead and make my stitch close to a 2 and try to stay over the top of it. And when I turn, I'm not going to have my needle on the outside of my turn. I'm going to have my needle on the inside of my turn so that it's held down there. Then I'm going to turn this corner. And so you can see that you really can only go in the same line that your foot can go in. Okay, so I'm going to turn the corner, and so I'm making sure that my needle is on the inside of my turn. When you're couching with a specialty foot, you can fly. But one of the things it does is it really pulls every stray thread into your zigzag, and I like that this is leaving some of it out for me. So in doing this with my regular foot, I learned something. The picking out of the little fibers was always something that took a lot longer than it seemed like it should. And so if you look at this close-up, you can see that the wine-colored threads that I did years ago with my couching foot are sewn more precisely with a smaller zigzag stitch. But when you balance that against the kind of hairy yarns that I like to use when I couch now, and the time that it takes to pick those hairs out because they get completely encased in your zigzag as you're stitching with that foot that feeds the yarn through the hole. This actually is sort of a good balance. You need to go a little slower in the stitching, but then you don't have that tedious job to get these hairy fibers picked out. I am going to spend some time picking some of the fibers out because it does sew some of them down in a way that's not very attractive, but I'll just spend a minute or two instead of 10 or 15 minutes at the end. So I'm going to do this kind of zigzag thread sketching, and I'm going to do it probably 3 times. Once with this red that I have, and then I'll do 2 other colors. And so I'm going to go pretty densely through the areas, but I'm not going to try to cover everything. And I just want it to go probably just out almost to the edge of my couching, and not too far in. So I'm just gonna do that and see if it starts coming back to me. When I do this, I usually don't do anything to get started except for just go back and forth over my start point a little bit. This way you can bury your lead and not have any parts that can pull out. This is a nice technique for covering a lot of ground quickly. I like the zigzag once you get it overlapping in your areas, it starts to look really nice, and you can create interesting effects by using more than one color or using variegated threads. You can even do this with metallic thread, but if you do that, you need to put your metallic in the bobbin in most cases and flip your work over and stitch from the other side. And I'm going to demonstrate that when we do the stencil purse quilt top to catch up with this. And after that, we'll be making our straps and a couple other little parts for the purse, and then we'll be putting the bags together. So here is where I am so far, and I'm going to take a few minutes and stitch in some of these big empty areas and down these sides, and I think I might do a couple different things. This part of the bag can be as fancy or as plain as you want. I've never dealt with these loose hairs everywhere in the way, causing me to skip stitches and have other sorts of issues. I wouldn't do this just this way ever again. I would either not use the furry yarn, or I would apply it after I free motion quilt the area and get basically the area attached down. I have to give my little disclaimer again. I apologize, I haven't made one of these in years, and I don't plan to ever make another one, but I did really want to pass this along. It's a very cute sort of idea for a purse, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So here my purse top is. I consider it to be pretty much finished. Any buttons that I add will come at the final stage when I can hand sew those, and especially if I sew around this area, for sure I will be doing that with pliers. I had a few problems quilting in these background areas because of all these hairs, and so I really recommend that if you're going to use the hairy threads, that you go ahead and do some sort of background quilting that you like through these areas after you do the step where you do the color wash. And you'll quilt over that in some instances, but this kind of quilting that we're doing is very layered and embellished, and the quilting will run over. So when I did this white quilting through here, it runs over my couched yarn, and so does this sort of loose satin stitch that I added. And to be honest, I added this because I had a lot of places where these fibers, these hairs on this yarn, cause skip stitches, and I would rather add one more level of embellishment and add something else and deal with those skip stitches than leave a lot of really long stitches in my work. And so definitely, if you're going to do the hairy yarn, do it last, or towards the end anyway. And that will also, if you do background quilt, it'll minimize this kind of part here where this isn't quite perfect, because this did lap over just a tiny bit over my stitch in the ditch. So after we catch up with the stencil version, we'll make this into a purse with the jeans liner inside, and I think it's going to be really cute, though not perfect, since nothing ever really is. Thanks.